Joining us today is Rakesh Chauhan, and Rakesh Chauhan is a British Indian pianist and composer, and has used his music to open up and explore new boundaries when it comes to men's mental health. Dylan Patel, DNA Fitness mental health specialist, and he's the founder of that particular organization. Tina Mistry from HCPC, who is a psychologist, and myself, keeping you company alongside with these very special people who are experts in their fields as well. So my welcome, please, Rakesh, Dylan and Tina, to this discussion. Wishing you a very, very good afternoon and also a very happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali and good afternoon as well.
I'm very happy Diwali to you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, as far as the title is concerned, Boys Do Cry. Perhaps I can kick off with you first of all, and I'm going to go to the female member of our panel today, psychologist Tina Mistry, first of all, from HCPC. As far as psychology is concerned, Tina Mistry, in your profession, do boys cry? Should they cry? And sometimes it is said that it's good to shed a tear or two because it produces what we know as endorphins within our biological system. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm no biologist or doctor by any shape or means.
Yeah, it's a huge question, isn't it? And I think it's one that we need to be talking about more. So it's wonderful that you've raised this today. Now, of course, the question, boys do cry, men cry, women cry, children cry, we all cry, animals cry. So actually it is a human response to sadness. It is a response to distress. So actually, yes, in a nutshell it is, but sadly there are many factors that do get in the way to allow men to express their emotions.
Okay, but do men not get embarrassed when they express their emotions? And should we be embarrassed doing so?
Yeah, and I think the problem lies in that we have these systems of oppression that come against us. So the biggest one is patriarchy, and patriarchy is a system which holds not only women but holds men down too. And the ideas that surround patriarchy are that men need to behave in certain ways. So for example, this is where we get the idea of toxic masculinity, that men shouldn't cry, shouldn't show emotion, should be the strong one, should be the provider, should have all these attributes, which sadly create this rigidity for their behaviors and the way that they are. And it doesn't allow any flexibility, it doesn't allow any expression. It creates this sort of system where a lot of internalization occurs, and the distress, like you said, Tony, is held within. It's not allowed to be expressed. So this then causes additional problems in which, and men have their own ways of coping with this distress.
There's an old saying and a cliche which says, have you ever seen a grown man cry? But I'm going to come back to that because I'm going to go to Rakesh now. And Rakesh, you are a British Indian pianist and composer. Why and who inspired you to get in touch and recognize that there is men's mental health that needs to be brought into reality? Boys don't cry narrative, still a reality. How can it be tackled head on?
Well, Tony, I think you raised a really important question there. And before I begin, I would just like to congratulate both Tina and Dylan for the excellent work that they both do in their respective spaces. I know Tina is a psychiatrist and Dylan uses fitness and sports as a medium. And I think these are really vital and crucial ways that we find to tackle mental health. It's become more important now more than ever. And as a result of the pandemic itself, we have actually seen statistically that mental health issues are more pronounced. So it is important that we do try to tackle them. I think Tina rightly alluded to earlier, there are stigmas associated, and I think they are particularly more concentrated and more sort of composed within certain demographic, different communities, definitely within the South Asian and BAME communities, mental health is much more pronounced. But it's also seems to be much more concentrated as well, or less spoken about within males. I think 1 in 8 males do face mental health. So it's important that as a creative and as an artist, that I can use my tools that are available as a disposable to communicate messages. And for me, I've realized that entertainment is actually an escape for many people, but as well as that, it is something which everybody can relate to. So sometimes messages need to be translated and put through a catalyst so people can relate to them, recognize them, such as the work which Dylan does through fitness, where it's not directly having those conversations, but it's allowing to, as you said, open up to have those conversations we can have. And I think Tina put it absolutely perfectly earlier.
Well, let's talk to Dylan, and Dylan Patel, DNA fitness mental health specialist that you are. When it comes to men's mental health, people will say, okay, let's just go to the gym and just thrash it out in the gym and work up a sweat, and we'll come back feeling psychologically better. Is that in reality what really happens? Welcome, by the way. And is that what really happens within our minds, our heads? And do we need to go and do the weights just to get rid of this mental aggression that's built up within our minds?
I'd say it depends. Every single person is so different. And when we say mental health, there's so many different issues that we're actually speaking of, right? It's not just one kind of thing. So everyone has all sorts going on in their head. So depending on that, then I would say it depends what kind of direction you go down. And when you say, for example, thrash out the weights and then you'll come home feeling better, that kind of comes from our body's response to exercise, not just weights, but doing anything. It might be running, it could be yoga, could be weights, martial arts, anything. Our body releases endorphins when we exercise, which are the feel-good hormones. So if you are having, let's say, a bit of a downtime and you do go and exercise for an hour or so, you will feel a little bit better after it. Not saying that it's going to solve all of your mental health issues that you might be having, but it will help you at that moment in time. And then I think it's more long-term in the sense of you can't just expect to, for example, go to the gym once, feel good, and then that's it, right? It takes time to build certain things and change your lifestyle and build these habits. And what I see in a lot of clients of mine, for example, is confidence. There's a certain confidence that comes from exercise and looking after yourself, your self-esteem, things like that. And that happens over time. I've had so many clients, for example, who have been quite shy and reserved when they first step into a gym. And then a year or two down the line, they're completely different people. They open up a lot more. They speak a lot more. Obviously, when I meet clients for the first time, we're strangers almost. We might have spoke a few times, but we've never communicated properly in person. So when we do meet, you can see them slowly opening up over time. And I feel like it's the environment that they're in. When they get comfortable in that gym environment, when they get comfortable exercising, when they see the physical and mental changes in their body, they then feel more confident to speak to you. And then I have lots of conversations with clients of mine who then tell me literally their life stories, where at the start I could barely get 2 words out of them. So it takes time to kind of get from the beginning to opening up. And I think it plays a major role in it.
Indeed it does. But when you exercise and you say that exercise brings out those happy hormones, the endorphins, but so does crying. So that's another conversation for another day. Tina, if I may come to you and ask you that men's mental health, as it's been mentioned already in this conversation, that it can stem from many different situations. I'd like to talk to you about the causes of mental health, the negative aspects of it, through your experience as a psychologist. And what are the causes?
There's so many. But I guess, one of the key areas that I'm interested in is hearing a person's story, just like Dylan does. That's the crucial bit. when we start to hear people's stories, what's embedded within those stories are stories of trauma, or stories of loss, or stories of hurt, pain. So all of these things that we're listening out for are things that, you know, for all of us feel quite normal when we watch a television series or a movie, that we are moved by the, you know, key figures or the, you know, the archetype hero who loses something, but then something changes. And this is the same thing for us as well, is that we all will experience some sort of loss, some sort of distress, some sort of trauma at some point in our lives. But then the trajectory depends on what are the other factors, associating factors around us. So, for example, what is our supporting systems like? Do we have a supportive family? Do we have a space where we can talk about things? Or are our systems sadly dysfunctional because they're all experiencing their own traumas? So it's not one set thing that we experience. There can be many, but the main threads that we tend to hear are, you know, tragedies, losses, distress, trauma.
Rakesh does it through music. Dylan does it through exercise, health and fitness. You do it through psychology. There are support mechanisms concerned, but as far as the Indian community is concerned, perhaps these formulas, resources aren't easily available to them, either through language disabilities, lack of understanding, or resources just simply not being made aware to people. What do you think needs to be done here?
It's a very complex conversation, this is, because I think that especially the people that are living in, you know, in the UK or the US, that the systems that are built are actually made for, you know, white British people. So a lot of the research that has been conducted within kind of, you know, the mental health literature, if you look at it, it's all based on white, you know, middle class or student population. So the findings and the models that you know are often used to treat and support people are kind of mainly made for this specific group of people. What's happening now within the world of psychology, and psychiatry, is that we are stepping up our game. We are making it more of a conversation to be had, that we need to increase our research within these communities. But also we need to be careful with the word BAME, because again, that creates this sort of grouping of the other. And, you know, if you look at the word BAME, it's Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. Within that group, there is so much diversity. And then if we just take out the chunk of South Asian, within that group, there is so much diversity. So we have to be thinking very carefully about the populations that we're trying to serve. And it's not a simple, easy procedure. This is going to take a lot of work from, you know, our statutory services, our third sector services, and also, you know, industries as well, to have these conversations and to start to listen to the voices of the communities. And that is the crucial part. If we do not listen, we will never understand. And, you know, I think that we're talking as an NHS trained professional, you know, that is a thing that actually gets in the way. It's this real kind of barrier. And, you know, I'm going to say it, there is systemic racism within these structures. So we have to address these head on. But also, like you said, we have the issues around stigma, we have the issues around kind of access. So there needs to be a point where we're starting to collaborate more. And what I am seeing a lot of conversations, especially on social media, is grassroots organizations taking the lead and really making an impact, you know, by working collectively with the NHS, but also working with gurdwaras, mosques, mandirs, and they're doing, you know, kind of the work ground up. So sadly, it's a slow process, but it is happening. And I think that this kind of, you know, millennial generation are taking that kind of conversation and pushing it forwards because they want things to be different.
And indeed, for those of you watching this and consuming this very special media that we're sharing with you, India Inc. iGlobal will be sharing various websites and contact numbers and places where you can get in touch and get advice if you need. So make sure you go to our websites to check that out. Tina mentioned a few moments ago, Rakesh, that support forums are available. People need to get out, and there is this communication thing that's going on. You've done that through music. What have been your findings, and perhaps even a success story or two?
So I think I'd just like to pick up on a really important point which Dylan mentioned earlier, was about how people feel better. And he said that through his work, his excellent work in the space of fitness, that the release of endorphins really do help people feel better. Arts is the business of creating goosebumps, and being able to use those tools and mediums is really important and really powerful. So I've teamed up with a fantastic organisation called the British Asian Trust, who do excellent work throughout this a range of spaces, helping those who are most vulnerable in society, and specifically across South Asia. And they have a mental health stream. So I put together a production which tells elements of how mental health matters can be portrayed through dance forms. And we really wanted to, so I worked with an amazing dancer for the BBC Dance of the Year, really trying to translate these to say, okay, because, you know, as Tina rightly said earlier, sometimes it needs to be tailored. There's so much diversity within the South Asian groups itself. And it's important that we tailor and we do find how we can spread these messages to each and every corner. My corner is the arts corner. So it's really important that I could tailor and translate the message in that way. So we created a video production which has had a significant response, and it's not something I envisaged at the beginning. You know, within 30 days, I think we've reached over 1 million people through the project itself, and it just shows there's a clear call to action at the end of the video where people can get help, and it just shows actually how people relate to different things. And it's actually, I must say thank you to you, Tony, for encouraging these conversations, and to iGlobal, who actually create spaces for these conversations to happen. Getting people from all walks of life together. I've never spoken on mental health as much as I have done in the last 6 months in terms of using this project going forward. So I think it's platforms which actually enable us to do this.
Dylan, Tina was talking about the aspects of mental health and sometimes the causes of it, and there are so many. Rakesh does it through music, you do it through health and fitness, but perhaps you'd like to share with us today a success story or two through how you've helped people who might be suffering from the dilemma of mental health.
Yeah, so like we've kind of all said, there's so many different issues that we can speak about when we say mental health. And in terms of a success story, the biggest success for me is just to see someone change completely, right? And when I say that, I mean change for the positive. And although they might not necessarily speak of their issues, you can see the person kind of flourishing. You know, I've had numerous clients. Like I said, it's hard to kind of pick one out. I'm trying to think now. Let's see. Oh yeah, okay. One of my clients, she was very reserved. I know we're speaking about men's mental health, but if I want to just talk about mental health as a whole, right? This is how it can help someone. And she was very reserved when I first ever met her. I did a consultation with her. We sat down together, and I'm asking all the questions that I would ask. So I'm getting to know them, because when it comes to health and fitness, it's much deeper than just exercising, right? It's about getting to know the person. It's about knowing what's driving them to do this. You know, okay, they want to start exercising, they want to start going to the gym, they want to improve their health, get in shape, whatever it might be. But what's the core reason for this? You know, is it that they want to look good? Is it because they have had issues with someone saying something about them in the past that might have upset them? They didn't like that, and somehow that's kind of built into, right, I need to change my body now, for example. It could be so many things. So it's about getting to those root causes, right? And this client of mine, she was like almost like a brick wall. It was hard to kind of break her down. I I could barely get 2 words out of her. And you're training and you're exercising, and you got to understand, I spend a lot of time with these people, right? So unless you build some sort of relationship with them, it's never going to work. Yeah. So over time, she kind of, not so much even her body changing, but I could see her mentality changing, in the sense she'd slowly start opening up. Like I mentioned earlier, this is what exercise kind of does to people. And she slowly started opening up. You can see the confidence growing. You could see it growing over time and time and time. And probably it was around 6 months in, I'd say, she came to the gym one day and she was quite upset. I didn't know what about, but she came upstairs. So our gym that I used to work in back then had 2 floors. So downstairs was like the reception area, all the sofas and things, and upstairs was the actual gym floor where we exercised. And I used to wait upstairs for my clients. She came upstairs, and before we even walked into the actual gym floor, she said, "Dylan, can we just sit down and talk today?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Went downstairs and literally sat downstairs and on the sofas for an hour, and we spent her whole session just talking. And she literally told me everything. And everything I thought about her for the last 6 months or so, it all made sense now. And I knew why she was doing what she was doing. And I think it took her time to kind of open up, you know. And the same when it comes to men's mental health. I think it takes time for men to open up. And I think they need, like we've spoken about, support groups and support circles and who you're actually talking to. You know, sometimes it's hard for men to speak to people who are actually the closest to them. Sometimes they need people who are kind of like an outsider, you know, to just have an actual honest conversation with. So I'd say that was probably, in terms of a success story, I just think for me that was a personal success, that I managed to break down those barriers and finally get to the root causes of what was happening in her life, you know.
There's always external causes that causes mental health for a lot of people, but for men, Tina, men have this certain pride about themselves. I'm a man, you know. I don't need to share this. Why should I open up to anybody? And these external sources just echo away in the mind, and constantly recalled in memory through conversation and through acts as well. And therefore, men often turn to different forms of comfort. And that's one of the subjects I wanted to touch with you upon today, that when this happens within a man's mind, the thought patterns, the psychological aspect of this, as a psychologist yourself, how would you address that, and what have been your findings in this particular field?
Interestingly, I did actually do my thesis, one of my chapters of my thesis on substance abuse within the South Asian male population. It was a while ago, I ain't gonna lie, so I'll try and remember what I can. But yes, so if we're talking about substance abuse here, you know, that actually alcohol and drugs are kind of typically your coping mechanisms for distress. Now, what we know that alcohol and drugs do is they cut off the sensation of any emotion. That's what they're made to do, basically. They give us a temporary state of euphoria, but then we also know that there is the crash. And when we get the crash, we crave for the substance again. So there is our addiction cycle happening in a nutshell. And we've got the added layer of the celebration of alcohol use within our cultures, you know, that actually it's cool to drink, and you know, you hear it in our Bhangra songs, you hear it in Bollywood movies, you see it in Bollywood movies. So there is this almost like celebration that in order to be masculine, you need to drink the galassi, you need to take 4 more shots or whatever it is, that this kind of behavior is normalized, and actually that we need to start to almost step back and say, hang on a minute, when is this going above and beyond the line of what is classed as normal or social drinking? And, you know, and the difficulty with that is that a lot of this behavior is done in secrecy. It's never really done outside in the social sphere. So it's very difficult to recognize. It's mainly family members who will know this, that, you know, you'll find bottles in and around the house. You'll start to kind of notice changes in behavior. And sadly, again, we have the problem of stigma and shame. that we have this collective sense of shame that because our father, our brother, our nephew, our uncle is, using alcohol or drugs as a coping mechanism, that we keep it in the family. We don't share it with anybody. And this is where we're going terribly, terribly wrong. Because what ends up happening is that that person doesn't get the help they need. And, and there lives that tragedy that, in the worst case scenario, you will see an alcohol related death. And then there will be this added layer of trauma and guilt and, all that other stuff that happens when somebody dies. And the cycle then continues. So we're not modeling any positive change. We're not modeling any positive behaviors. We're not showing that we need to address the problem, the root cause. And again, like we said, we've all said this, that the root cause can be anything. It could be, one of the areas that I'm fascinated by is intergenerational trauma. And this is something within the literature and within the kind of psychology sphere that we're only starting to understand. So a simple context could be, let's look at partition. Let's look at what happened to those families during partition and the trauma that they each individually experienced, but also as a collective experience. And, we can relate this. We can relate to this trauma because right now we are experiencing a collective trauma. The fact that there is a virus out there and is killing people, but not only killing people, it is, damaging and causing havoc to people's lives. So we are under this higher state of what we would call anxiety and stress and strain. And this, we know actually at a long periods of stress can actually have a physical impact on us. So this is where we start to see the changes in our body. And this is where we are more likely to see heart attacks. This is where we're more likely to see increases in physical health illnesses. And guess what? Who's number one on those lists for heart attacks? It's us South Asians. So again, we have a problem here. And alcohol in the mix of that, it's not a great concoction.
It's not a great.
We have
I'm going to continue talking with you, Tina. Dylan and Rakesh, feel free to interject in this particular part of the question that I'm going to share with Tina right now. And that is, the Indian community arrived in the UK 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. And along the way, there's various social stigmas that were attached to the Indian community during those years and decades as well. Children who grew up with bullying in schools. And is it true for me to say that perhaps the Indian community has grown up with a dual personality, where on one hand they're trying to be part of the Asian culture, on the other hand they're trying to be part of the British society that we're living in this country at the moment, and how difficult that's been to integrate the two? We almost live dual personality or dual lives. Again, Rakesh and Dylan, please feel free to interject on this. Tina, take it away.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the issue that many of the individuals from the diaspora talk about, this kind of constant code switching, we call it, within the psychology world, where we come home and we talk our native language and, we eat our food. And then once we leave the door, we are somebody else. And we can see small examples of this. I remember when I was younger, I realized that my uncles had English names. And I was like, why have you got an English name, but your name is such and such? And they were like, well, this is what my friends call me. So it's fascinating. We have had to adapt. This is our way of adapting because this is a survival mechanism. Now, sadly, the difficulties with this kind of code switching is that it does have an impact on our identity formation. So we will get to a certain point in our lives where we'll think, oh my gosh, who am I? Like, actually, am I this or am I that? When in fact, what we need to be starting to have the conversation around is the hybridity, this kind of mixing or enmeshing of two identities, that we can be both. We don't need to be and or, we are both. So, when I describe myself, I say British Asian or British Indian, and I've started to kind of embrace that more, because we have to embrace both parts of ourselves, because all that does is it creates what we call dissociation or splitting off of parts of ourselves, which then creates further problems down the line.
I think Tina
Rakesh, feel free to...
Yeah, absolutely. So Tina's our resident expert on this, and I've definitely learned a few sort of psychology terms. But I think um, it's absolutely acceptable and right that we do have confidence in our culture. Eating our jalebis and saying it is jalebi. This is our food. We're very proud of our culture. Specifically in the space of work that I do, I actually play the style of Indian classical music, but I play it on a Western instrument, the piano. So in itself, there's a cultural paradox and there's a natural tendency when you put two things together and they don't necessarily fit. And I don't think it's about having to make things fit. I think I say this all the time when I speak about music. Music is a universal language. I don't feel like I'm having to dilute it in any way. My audience actually is predominantly Western, even though I play a style of Indian music. And I'm always very fascinated actually, because I always, especially when I'm performing in Europe, there's a lot of the Western audience, they've actually studied the culture in so much depth, and I'm actually able to learn so much from them. So it's not about trying to fit in, but it's about trying to learn. And we live in such a diverse society, and the more we can learn, the more we realize that actually, we are just all humans. We are just all the same people. And I think that's the most important thing, that fluidity, which helps us to transcend any barriers and to live in society in a really harmonious way.
Dylan, you've heard the conversation, you've heard the questions, and you've heard what Tina and Rakesh had to say. But for the Indian community who's lived and grown up in this country, what have been your observations, and what do you have to say on the subject?
So I agree. I think a lot of it is about learning and adjusting and adapting, like has been said. But I think another part of it is also educating. And I think the problem comes more specifically, I've noticed it in my generation, where our parents they grew up in a different time, in a different place. They obviously came over here, but their values and everything was pretty much still how they were taught by their parents, and they've tried to instill that into us. But sometimes it doesn't work where we live. Like we said, it's hard to kind of be two people. You have to accept who you are. And I think that's where the education part comes in, where it's also our job to educate the older generation as to why we want to do the things we want to do, or why we do them. As an example, in the South Asian community, I'd say for years, exercise was not seen as a priority. It was always about, the women's job was almost to stay at home, raise kids, cook food, so when the husband goes to work and provides, he comes home, he has dinner on the table. And we don't live in a society like that anymore. We live in a world now where women have careers, men are staying at home with kids. Roles have changed. So it's hard sometimes for the older generations to understand what's going on, and then it kind of puts pressure on our generation. Me as a man, it's hard in the sense of I've seen my dad, for example, live that kind of life where he's been the provider and he's done a brilliant job at it. My mum's worked with him, she's helped him, they've also raised a family, they've done it all. But for me, it's more like I want to do the things I want to do, and I'm very lucky in the sense that my family are very liberal, and I can educate them, and they're willing to listen and understand. But I know not everyone is like that. But we need to find a way to educate that generation, in the sense of, if I take exercise again as an example, when I first ever started going to the gym, my grandma used to be like, why are you going to the gym so much? You're going to get too skinny. In their head, it was always the mentality that if someone is quite thin, they are unhealthy, for example, when we know sometimes it's the complete opposite. Being overweight is actually unhealthy. So then it was my job to kind of make her try and understand why I do what I do, why I enjoy it, why it's good for me. Even with the foods that we eat, a lot of the foods that we eat in, for example, the Indian community, they taste lovely, but they're not exactly the most healthy things to be putting into our body. And grandmas don't care about that. They just want you to eat, they want to see you happy and eating. So my grandma used to always feed us food. And me and my sister, I had one sister, we were both very chubby kids. And it's only when we grew up and we realized, right, we need to start looking after our health more. We can't always live like this. And then it's, like I said, educating the older generations as to, look, that's good now and then, but we can't eat this all the time, or this is why we exercise, because we need to look after our hearts. Like it was mentioned earlier, heart health, diabetes, cholesterol, those are three big issues in the South Asian community. But the older generations don't know much about this kind of thing, you know. And again, if I use my grandma as an example, her English wasn't always the best. So all the kind of media that's out there, all the articles that are out there, she wouldn't be able to read them or understand them, you know. So then it's our job to translate that and kind of show them what's happening, why we're doing what we're doing. So as well as it is a learning curve for us, because we're part of this, we're the first of this generation that's kind of two worlds in one. It's also us educating the older generations, and that will hopefully help make the transition a lot easier.
Indeed, very well said. Says he at the time of Diwali, where we actually do tend to indulge a little bit more than we normally do. But anyway, that's another story and discussion for another day. We're just about to conclude now with something quite special, and a special film which we're going to be sharing with you right now. But just before I do that, may I take this opportunity to thank you, Tina Mistry, psychologist, for joining us today on this fantastic discussion. I wish I could talk with you guys for much longer. Dylan Patel, a DNA fitness mental health specialist, very well done on what you're doing in helping the community as well. And Rakesh Chauhan, British Indian pianist and composer as well. And Rakesh, whilst we're on the subject of talking about you briefly here, you've actually produced a music video to raise awareness of mental health through opening conversation. But just before we go into that, may I take this opportunity to thank all three of you for joining us today and sharing such vital and interesting information with us and the community as well right here on this very special forum. And take this opportunity to also wish you and your families and friends and relatives a very, very happy Diwali from all of us as well. And we thank you for joining us here today.